Welcome back, everybody, to Sip and Talk. Hope you had a good weekend. Ready to jump into things again.
Hello. Yes, ready to go. It feels like there's always something brewing globally, doesn't it?
There really does. And today it feels like we're looking at two sides of the same coin almost. Borders, identity, who belongs, who doesn't. It's everywhere.
It really is. You've got this intense pressure, these big shifts happening. And, the challenge with a topic like this, it gets so emotional so fast.
Right.
People's feelings often just completely swamp the facts.
Yeah.
So our job today, I guess, is to try and cut through some of that noise.
Exactly. We've got a pretty fascinating stack of information here comparing, really different situations. First up, we're going to look at three big democracies. The U.S., the U.K., and Japan, places where, let's be honest, migration is basically keeping their populations afloat, demographically speaking, but politically. It's all about fear. Crime fears, culture clashes.
Yeah, that whole narrative. And then we pivot to Taiwan, which is just a totally unique situation.
Right.
They're actually embracing certain kinds of migration, mainly from Southeast Asia, because they need it economically. But they are putting up this massive wall, psychologically and politically, against influence from one place.
Yeah.
China.
It's like selective openness versus total defense.
Precisely. A masterclass in identity defense, really. So the goal today, separate the perception from the reality in these migration stories. See what the data actually says.
Okay, let's do it. And we kind of have to start with the hottest button issue, right? This claim you hear constantly, more migrants equals more crime. Let's look at the UK, US, Japan. What do the official numbers tell us?
Well, the big picture, maybe before we dive into each country, is just how vital immigration is becoming for, the basic functioning of modern economies.
It's not optional anymore for growth.
Pretty much. Every single one of these countries, US, UK, Japan, they rely on it. They need immigrants to balance out their own aging populations and falling birth rates. It's a labor necessity.
Okay, so let's start with the UK then. They've been on a real political journey with this, haven't they? Up and down.
Oh, absolutely. A total roller coaster is a good way to put it. The basic reality for the UK, demographically, is that net international migration isn't just one source of population growth.
It's the source.
It's the main source, yeah. If you look back, say, since 2004, immigrants have accounted for something like 65% of all population growth.
Wow, 65%. That's a fundamental shift.
It is. It changes who the nation is, fundamentally. By 2023, the foreign-born population reached about 18%.
And it's not just about the raw numbers, right? It's about who is coming in age-wise. That must be critical for things like, the economy, the NHS.
Absolutely essential.
Yeah.
That's the key point. Immigrants tend to arrive when they're younger, during their prime working years. So their average age is way lower than the native-born population.
Right.
Which is crucial for funding things like the National Health Service, pensions, the whole tax base. Really, they're kind of the engine room, helping to offset the aging native workforce.
Okay, but we saw those huge headlines about net migration numbers in 2023. Really high. What are they doing now? Are they trying to control that?
Yeah, they are. That's where you see the policy kicking in. The government clearly felt those 2023 numbers were, politically tricky. So projections showed a pretty big drop expected by the end of 2024, down to around 431,000 estimated. But that drop isn't just happening on its own.
It's policy changes.
Exactly. Direct result of new rules. Things like restricting the number of dependents international students can bring, tightening up visa requirements for some non-EU workers. So yes, the numbers were huge, but they could be influenced by these targeted policy levers.
All right, so $1 million question, maybe. The crime connection in the UK, does that huge demographic shift actually lead to more crime nationally?
Statistically, no.
Yeah.
And this is where you see that massive gap between the political talk and the actual evidence.
Okay.
Authoritative studies, from places like the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, and the Migration Observatory at Oxford, they consistently find no clear universal link.
No causal link.
No strong causal evidence that migration overall pushes up national crime rates in England and Wales.
Okay, help me get my head around that. The population grows fast because of migration.
Yep.
Why doesn't crime just go up proportionally?
Well, because crime isn't just about how many people there are. It's tied into all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
Socioeconomic factors, integration, opportunity, poverty levels.
Right.
And what's really interesting, actually, is that some long-term research shows the opposite for certain types of crime, like property crime.
It goes down.
Sometimes, yeah. A negative correlation. As immigration increased in some areas or periods, property crime actually decreased.
Yeah.
The idea is Maybe that bringing in working-age people, filling jobs, maybe stabilizing communities economically, that could actually reduce certain kinds of crime, not increase them.
So if the big picture nationally is stable, or maybe even better in some ways, where does this idea of migrant crime come from? Is it just made up?
Not totally made up, but definitely skewed. This is where you have to look at specific data points carefully, like the prison population. Foreign nationals do make up a disproportionate share of prisoners. It was around 12.4% in 2024. Now, that's lower than their share of the total population, which was 18% foreign-born. But it's still significant.
So what does that number actually tell us then?
It tells us there are specific, maybe localized issues, perhaps higher rates among certain groups who arrived under specific conditions, or maybe it reflects different policing priorities. Sometimes it's skewed by arrests for immigration offenses themselves, not necessarily, street crime.
So it's not proof of a general crime wave caused by all immigrants. It's more complex.
Exactly. It's often a localized issue or reflects enforcement patterns, but it gets spun politically into this narrative of a national trend. That's the danger.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. The U.S., the political heat on this, maybe even higher.
Oh, definitely. And the economic reliance. Arguably even more stark in the U.S.
Immigration.
Both documented and undocumented is just fundamental to the U.S. economy and population stability. It's the main thing offsetting the native-born population's really low birth rate and, the aging of the baby boomers. Without immigrants, the U.S. workforce would be shrinking rapidly.
Is there a key statistic that really shows that?
Yeah, there is. The foreign-born share of the population hit about 14.3% in 2023, which is high historically. But the kicker is this. Between 2022 and 2023, immigration accounted for 100% of U.S. population growth.
100%. So without immigrants, the population would have stalled or shrunk.
Exactly. Stagnation or decline. They're not just adding to growth anymore. They are the growth.
Wow. Okay. So they're clearly filling essential jobs. You see it in farming, construction, healthcare. But the whole conversation, especially around the southern border, is just dominated by crime fears. What does the research say in the U.S. similar to the U.K.?
It mirrors the U.K. findings. Often even more strongly, actually. Study after study from universities, think tanks, economists consistently shows that immigrants, and that includes unauthorized immigrants, tend to have crime rates or incarceration rates that are lower than native-born Americans, or at the very worst, about the same.
Lower.
Often lower, yeah. And stable immigrant communities, places with strong social networks, often correlate with lower local crime rates over time.
So why? Why the huge disconnect? Why do polls show so many Americans genuinely believe immigration, especially at the border, is driving up crime in their cities?
It's complicated. Part of it is definitely how the media covers it.
Yeah.
High-profile crimes involving non-citizens get amplified. National coverage creates a distorted picture.
Selective reporting.
Very selective. But there's another piece, which is about enforcement itself. When law enforcement agencies shift their focus, maybe due to political pressure, and start prioritizing arrests based on immigration status.
Like immigration violations rather than, say, felony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or processing people at the border. That generates a huge amount of data showing non-citizen arrests, even if the underlying crime is just crossing the border or overstaying a visa. That data then gets presented to the public, often without context, as evidence of rising migrant crime. Even though it doesn't necessarily mean more danger to the community overall, it's an enforcement strategy creating its own statistical narrative.
Fascinating. The mechanism itself generates the fear. Okay, let's shift again. Japan. Totally different context, culturally, historically very homogeneous. How are they handling this?
Japan is. It's like this slow-motion collision between demographic necessity and deep-seated cultural identity. They're aging fast, they have critical labor shortages, they desperately need workers.
Because they are letting more people in.
They have to. The foreign resident population has hit record highs, still small by Western standards, maybe around 3.04% of the total population in 2024. But for Japan, that's a big change.
And who are they letting in mostly?
It's largely driven by specific needs. Foreign workers for construction, agriculture, elderly care, and also international students. It's absolutely essential to keep certain parts of their economy running.
Okay, so in Japan's super safe society, how does the crime narrative work there? Are they blaming foreigners too?
Well, Japan is still incredibly safe overall. Crime did tick up slightly between 2022 and 2023, but it was from historically low levels, kind of a post-pandemic rebound maybe.
And the share attributed to foreigners?
Very small. Official data suggests foreign nationals account for maybe 2.2% of reported criminal cases. Tiny. The overall increase in crime seems to be mostly a domestic phenomenon.
So again, similar data. Migration is needed, not driving crime overall. But in Japan, that cultural resistance must be intense. Any change feels huge there, right?
Exactly. Because the society is built on this idea of shared norms, high trust, homogeneity. Even a small increase in foreign residents or a few high-profile incidents involving foreigners can trigger disproportionate fear.
Xenophobia gets amplified.
Right. It feels like a threat to the very fabric of society, even when the statistics show the risk is negligible. The perception of foreigner crime can become powerful, regardless of the data.
Okay, before we move into the whole assimilation debate, let's quickly zoom back to the UK. That case study we talked about, the Muslim immigrant community. Because that really highlights the tension, right? Economic need versus cultural fear.
It really does. It's a critical group to understand. The Muslim population in the UK is estimated around 7% now, maybe a bit more. But they're not evenly spread out.
Concentrated in cities?
Heavily, like 15% in London. And demographically, they are vital. Their average age is about 28. The national average is 40.
So they're bringing youth to an aging country.
Exactly. Youth, higher birth rates,
Yeah.
That's essential for the long-term demographics.
And economically, are they contributing?
Yes, definitely. Their overall contribution to GDP is positive, estimated around 4%. They fill crucial jobs, especially in the NHS, transport, retail. But, and this is the key thing, there are real integration challenges.
Such as?
Unemployment among young Muslims tends to be higher than the national average, maybe around 8.5% versus 4% overall.
Okay.
That creates economic stress, social friction, reliance on welfare. It fuels negative perceptions.
So you've got this necessary economic input, but also real friction points. How does the general public view this group then?
Public opinion is quite negative, often. Some polls suggest maybe 40% of Britons view Muslim immigration unfavorably.
And what drives that? Just the economic friction?
It's partly that, but it's heavily fueled by cultural fears, too. Concerns about, parallel societies forming, groups not integrating into mainstream British life, and critically, it's amplified by misinformation, sometimes deliberate disinformation.
Can you give an example of that, where misinformation really stoked fear?
Well, think about the reaction to incidents sometimes happening elsewhere, like that awful stabbing in Nanterre, France in 2024. Initially, it was widely and incorrectly blamed online on a Muslim asylum seeker.
Ah, right.
That false narrative spread like wildfire across Europe, including the UK, instantly ramping up anti-immigrant feelings before the actual facts came out.
Right.
So even though overall crime isn't driven by this group, the anxiety is real. And the backlash is real, too. Hate crimes against Muslims actually rose by about 12% in 2023-24.
Wow. So the takeaway is the need is real, the economic contribution is real, but the tension gets magnified by these friction points, economic stress, cultural difference, and often just plain false information.
And that tension, that leads us right into this really tricky, uncomfortable debate about culture, about assimilation. We've looked at the facts on crime and population, but now we have to talk about how people feel about cultural change.
Yeah, this is where it gets subjective, but politically, maybe even more powerful than the stats. This is where you hear arguments, like from commentators or streamers, people like Asmongold, maybe?
Right.
Saying the backlash isn't really about crime stats. It's about a feeling that large groups of immigrants aren't trying to fit in. Or worse, that they're actively trying to change the country they move to, disrespecting it.
Exactly. And this takes us into what some people call the entitlement argument.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with it or not, we need to understand why it resonates so strongly with parts of the native population.
Okay, so unpack that argument.
Yeah.
What's the core critique?
The argument basically rests on an idea of a social contract. It says, if you choose to leave your home country and move to a new one, you implicitly agree to accept and ideally respect the laws, the customs, the core culture of your new home.
Okay.
So the critique is aimed at immigrants who are seen as actively trying to transform the host country to make it more like where they came from. That behavior is viewed by critics as, well, the terms used are often obnoxious, patronizing, entitled.
The expectation is adapt or leave.
Pretty much. Respect the host country's way of life, its laws, its fundamental values. Or maybe this isn't the right place for you. That's the harsh version of the argument.
It is harsh, but
Yeah.
connect that feeling back to the mechanics of assimilation we talked about. There's a reason this fear feels real to some people, sociologically speaking.
Precisely. Assimilation isn't automatic. It depends a lot on scale and speed. Sociologists have observed for a long time that if you get a very large, very sudden influx of people from one specific background,
These stick together.
they stick together. It actually hinders integration. Why? Because if your community is large enough, you don't need to learn the local language fluently or adopt all the local customs to get by. You can live your life largely within your own group. It becomes a kind of parallel society.
Let's use that analogy you mentioned, the middle school lunch table. How does that work?
It's a great way to picture it. Imagine kids starting middle school. At first, kids from the same elementary school. They'll probably sit together. Familiar faces, right?
Sure. Comfort zone.
But over time, in a normally mixed school, those groups tend to break up. Kids make new friends, integrate across the whole school. However, imagine if 80% of the new middle school students all came from one single elementary school.
They just take over the cafeteria.
They'd basically be the cafeteria culture. They wouldn't have the same pressure or even the opportunity to mix and integrate. They'd likely just stick together at their old elementary school table. That initial group never really breaks down.
And that lack of mixing, that's where the friction happens, when core values clash.
That's the argument. It's not necessarily saying diversity itself is bad, but it argues that certain cultural values or belief systems just don't mix very well. They might be fundamentally opposed on key issues.
Like the extreme examples people use.
Yeah, the hypotheticals get thrown around.
Yeah.
What happens if someone with very traditional fundamentalist religious views moves next door to someone with a very liberal modern lifestyle, say a trans parent? If there's no shared cultural framework or willingness to compromise, the host country's usually high trust, low enforcement social rules start to break down under that strain. The focus then shifts onto the perceived intolerance or non-negotiable demands of the non-assimilating group.
Okay, this brings us back around to Japan. You called it the PvE server. Explain that analogy.
Right, PvE stands for player versus environment in gaming. It's like a game mode where everyone cooperates against the computer, not against each other. It's safe, predictable, non-confrontational.
So Japan operates like that socially?
In many ways, yes. It's highly developed, very homogeneous historically and crucially, operates on extremely high social trust. Because most people follow the unspoken rules, politeness, cleanliness, respecting cues, quiet on trains, the society doesn't need heavy-handed enforcement everywhere.
They rely on social pressure, not police on every corner.
Exactly. There's an assumption of compliance.
Yeah.
But that high trust system can be vulnerable. It can be exploited by people, often outsiders who don't share those norms or maybe don't respect them. They treat it like a private server where they think the rules don't apply to them or are lax.
They do things they wouldn't dare do back home, maybe.
Or wouldn't do in a place with stricter enforcement.
Yeah.
Littering, being loud in public, ignoring cues, disrespecting customs.
And that Mount Fuji incident is just the perfect, if slightly absurd, example of that disrespect, right?
It really crystallizes it. This convenience store becomes world famous because it has this perfect photo op with Mount Fuji in the background. Huge crowds, mostly tourists. It gets so disruptive, people trespassing on private property, leaving trash everywhere, blocking traffic for photos, that the local town finally puts up this big, ugly black screen to block the view entirely.
Okay, drastic. And the reaction?
Some tourists were literally caught poking holes in the screen to still get their selfie.
Oh, come on.
It's that level of entitlement, that blatant disregard for the local community's attempt to manage the situation.
Yeah.
And that kind of behavior, it massively fuels xenophobia. It reinforces the feeling among locals that these newcomers, these outsiders, just see the host culture as something to consume or exploit, not a society to respect and participate in.
And it makes people think, well, if they won't respect our way, maybe we need much stricter rules. Like, you know, the reputation Dubai has for enforcing public behavior.
Exactly. If the high-trust model is abused, the defensive reaction is often a demand for a low-trust, high-enforcement model.
Yeah.
Make them respect us. Okay, so now, let's completely change gears. Let's talk about Taiwan. Because they seem to have taken these lessons about assimilation, cultural mixing, external threats, and applied them in a really specific, unique way. They practice what we're calling selective inclusion.
Selective inclusion. Okay, that sounds like they're making a very clear distinction. Welcoming some, wary of others.
That's exactly it. On one hand, Taiwan sees migration from outside of China as an economic lifeline. They have one of the lowest birth rates on the planet, like 1.09 children per woman.
Wow, that's incredibly low.
It is. And that means serious labor shortages looming, especially in manufacturing, construction, and critically, in nursing and elderly care. They need people.
So who are they welcoming?
Mostly migrants from Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines. There are about 805,000 non-Chinese immigrants now, making up around 3.5% of the population. And Taiwan is actually quite proactive about integrating them.
Oh.
They have policies to support it. Things like voting rights for foreign spouses and local elections, human rights action plans that include migrants, cultural inclusion programs. They see these immigrants as an economic necessity, yes, but also potentially as a diplomatic asset, building ties in the region. They're trying to make assimilation work because they see this group as fundamentally beneficial and non-threatening.
Okay, so that's the inclusion part, but then there's the massive defense part, aimed squarely at China. And this isn't standard anti-immigrant sentiment, is it?
Not at all. It's totally different. It's an existential defense of their national identity and way of life. Their resistance to China isn't about xenophobia in the usual sense. It's a defense against what they see as deliberate cultural and political erosion.
Erosion aimed at undermining their autonomy.
Precisely. They look at Beijing's constant push for reunification, the whole one country, two systems offer. And they see it as the ultimate example of a powerful outside force trying to change the host country, trying to force assimilation into its system.
It connects back to that entitlement critique we talked about earlier, but on a geopolitical scale.
Exactly. If a critique in the West is sometimes about minority groups allegedly trying to change the majority culture, Taiwan sees itself facing a superpower trying to impose a complete political and cultural takeover. They view China's approach as the most extreme form of arrogant, invasive, non-respectful behavior imaginable.
And they have a very recent, very stark example right next door that fuels this fear, don't they? Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is the crucial cautionary tale, the future mirror, as some put it. Taiwan watched what happened there after Beijing imposed the national security law, and it terrified them.
What specifically did they see in Hong Kong that hardened their stance?
They saw freedoms just evaporate. Press freedom rankings plummeted. Hong Kong dropped to like 140th globally. Economic dynamism seemed to slow. And very importantly, they perceived a deliberate, steady influx of mainland migrants into Hong Kong.
Which they interpreted as
population replacement, as a strategy to dilute Cantonese identity, cement political control, and basically mainlandize Hong Kong. Whether that was the sole intent or not, that's how it was widely perceived in Taiwan.
And seeing that, it must have just solidified their own resistance.
Absolutely turbocharged it. It created a national consensus. You look at the polling data, over 80% of Taiwanese now reject the one country, two systems formula. Support for actual unification with China, it's cratered. It was under 7% in 2022, a historic low.
They're really serious about guarding against this.
Extremely. To the point where Taiwan actually tightened its residency rules for people coming from Hong Kong recently. Not because they don't sympathize, but out of fear that Beijing could use the flow of refugees to infiltrate Taiwan with agents. They treat resistance to this specific form of assimilation as a national security priority.
Okay, so we have to address the narrative coming from Beijing, right? China constantly pushes this idea of the strong motherland. They argue Taiwan would benefit, it would be an honor almost, to share the glory of rejuvenation by unifying. What's the essence of their pitch?
China's pitch is all about power and prestige. They emphasize their global standing. Second largest economy, huge military spending, over $296 billion last year. Their massive international influence through things like the Belt and Road Initiative, connecting nearly 150 countries.
So the message is, join the winning team.
Pretty much. We're a global superpower. Reunification is inevitable. You'll be better off sharing in our glory. It's a narrative of strength and destiny.
And it's not just military pressure, right? They use economic incentives, too.
Oh, definitely. Soft power is a big part of it. They have specific policies, like the famous Wadai 46 articles. These are basically packages of benefits, tax breaks, housing help, scholarships, business funding, aimed specifically at Taiwanese young people, entrepreneurs, businesses.
Trying to lure them over.
Exactly. Trying to get them to move to the mainland, work there, study there. It's an attempt at assimilation through economic entanglement and cultural blurring, not just military threats.
But Taiwan's rejection, it doesn't seem just emotional. You're saying they have cold, hard facts on their side to say, no thanks, we're actually doing better. Let's start with the money.
The economic reality, stark. Taiwan's GDP per capita, it's around $33,500. China's, about $12,600.
So the average Taiwanese person is almost 3 times wealthier.
Roughly 2.66 times, yeah, on average. So just purely economically, why would the average citizen vote for a merger that would likely dilute their standard of living?
And it's not just the average, right? It's about inequality, too, how the wealth is spread.
That's a huge point. You look at the Gini coefficient that measures income inequality. Lower is better, more equal. Taiwan's Gini is around 0.34. Pretty good. Typical of developed democracies. China's, it's much higher, around 0.47.
Meaning much greater gaps between rich and poor in China.
Exactly. So the average Taiwanese person lives in a society with significantly less extreme wealth disparity, more economic fairness compared to the mainland. It feels more stable, more equitable.
And Taiwan has also managed to resist China's economic pressure tactics.
They've worked hard on that. They've deliberately reduced their economic dependence on China. Exports to China used to be a much higher percentage of their total exports. Now it's down around 30%. That gives them more resilience when Beijing tries to use economic coercion, like suddenly banning Taiwanese pineapples or fish. They've shown they can withstand it.
Okay, so the economics are clear. What about the social side? The way of life. You mentioned social trust earlier.
This may be the most profound difference. Taiwan consistently scores incredibly high in global surveys on social trust. Trust in institutions, government, police, courts, is around 68%. That's very high, indicating a stable, functioning democracy people believe in. China's is lower, maybe 51%.
But the trust between people?
That's even more telling. Trust in strangers. In Taiwan, about 45% of people say they generally trust people they don't know. In China, it's only about 18%.
That's a massive difference. That's the difference between a high-trust society where you assume goodwill from others and maybe a lower trust, perhaps higher surveillance society where suspicion is more common.
Precisely. And that's reflected in other rankings, too. Freedom House rates Taiwan as free, scoring 94 out of 100. Robust democracy, high voter turnout, strong civil liberties. China, rated not free, scoring 8 out of 100. It's a completely different political and social environment. Better governance, objectively speaking.
And finally, underlying all of this is that sense of distinct identity.
That's the bedrock. The number of people on the island who identify only as Taiwanese, not Chinese, not both, has just soared. It was under 18% back in the early 90s. Now, it's over 63%. That strong sense of a unique local identity, combined with active efforts to preserve Taiwanese culture, local languages like Hokkien and Hakka, that's the ultimate defense against the kind of mainlandization they fear, the kind they saw happening in Hong Kong. They're not just rejecting China, they're actively affirming their own distinct and, in their view, superior way of life.
So it's kind of ironic, isn't it? In the West, the debate is often about whether immigrants are assimilating into the host culture. In Taiwan, the entire nation is fighting to avoid being forcibly assimilated by an external power, offering what they see as an inferior system.
Yeah, if you try to pull all these threads together, this global picture, you really see these two kind of opposing dynamics playing out around borders and identity right now.
Right. On one side, you have the Western democracies, Japan, too, where migration is, let's face it, a demographic lifeline. They need it. And the big fears about crime waves, mostly not backed up by the stats.
Mostly not. But that critique about assimilation, about cultural friction, that's tapping into something real, especially in those high-trust places like Japan, where perceived disrespect, that feeling of the social contract being broken, really hits hard.
But then Taiwan just completely flips that script. They welcome the migration they need for the economy, the non-Chinese migration. But they put up this fierce, unified defense against China,
whose actions they see as the ultimate, most entitled attempt by an outsider to force its ways, its identity, onto a host society, to change Taiwan to resemble the mainland.
So our goal here on Sip and Talk, as always, is just to lay out the information we've gathered, the different perspectives from around the world on these really complicated, really sensitive issues. We're not taking sides, just presenting the analysis.
And we really hope you, listening, keep thinking about it, keep questioning, keep doing your own research long after we finish talking.
Absolutely. Which kind of leads to maybe a final thought to leave people with. Given that pretty much all these developed countries, US, UK, Japan, even Taiwan in its own way, are becoming more and more dependent on migration for their demographic survival, how can these high-trust societies figure out how to manage it?
How do they bring in the people they need, deal with the inevitable cultural tensions, encourage successful integration or assimilation,
while also making sure the core values, the identity of the host country, isn't just eroded, but maybe even enhanced by the newcomers? How do you thread that needle?
That feels like the challenge for the 21st century, doesn't it? Finding that balance. Hashtag tag outro.
Indeed it does. Well, that's all the time we have for this Sip and Talk discussion. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Hope it gave you some food for thought.
If you enjoyed our chat, please do us a favor and hit that subscribe button for Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts. Helps us out a lot.
Definitely.
And hey, quick shout out. Our old buddy Micky from his YouTube channel, Micky to Life.
Oh.
He just dropped a new video, a wine tasting one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he brought back 3 pretty potent liquors from a trip to Europe. He's tasting them on camera. Sounds like fun. There's apparently a really interesting plum distillate in the mix. I kind of want to try that now.
Plum distillate.
Yeah.
Okay, intriguing. Micky's channel is always entertaining. Definitely check it out. Micky to Life on YouTube.
For sure. All right, everyone. Until next time, keep sipping, keep talking, keep thinking.
Cheers. Take care.